When Cedar Point announced in 2012 that they would be removing Disaster Transport, their enclosed Intamin bobsled, it upset more than a few people. The attraction had gathered a loyal cult following over its 27 years of operation, but in true Cedar Point fashion, its replacement would raise the bar and give guests something to marvel at before they had even entered the park. Gatekeeper is a B&M wing coaster that opened at Cedar Point in 2013. For many, it's the first coaster you'll see when entering the park, and that's because the coaster was designed to interact with the entrance, soaring right over top of it. Not everybody out there likes wing coasters, but I've had some pretty great rides on this one ever since it opened. Gatekeeper's station and lift hill are cleverly placed right along the beach, offering some excellent views of Lake Erie. Being a wing coaster, Gatekeeper offers you the choice of sitting on either the left or right side of the train, but left is the way to go, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Gatekeeper doesn't have much theming to speak of, but I do love its entrance sign and especially the design of the trains. One small detail I don't see brought up very often is how the eyes on the front of each train light up. It's easy to miss, but it helps bring some character to this otherwise unthemed coaster. Gatekeeper uses the B&M vest restraints, which I find comfortable but a bit too tight at times, although that's not too much of a concern since Gatekeeper doesn't have many moments of airtime during its layout. After a right turn out of the station, Gatekeeper begins to ascend its 170-foot lift hill. When the train reaches the top, the coaster goes right into its first inversion. This dive drop was actually the world's tallest inversion when Gatekeeper opened, and it stayed that way until 2019 when Steel Curtain surpassed that record. This dive drop is one of the main reasons to sit on the left side of the train, as you'll be lifted higher into the air since the train moves so slowly through it. Based on my experiences riding Gatekeeper, the first drop is the most intense part of the coaster, and as the train pulls out of the drop into its next inversion, an Immelman, I've actually managed to gray out a few times. Needless to say, this is my favorite part of the ride. Gatekeeper next heads into a large airtime hill, but because of the vest restraints and the way the hill is profiled, you don't really get any airtime from this part. The corkscrew that follows the airtime hill is a fun inversion, but it's hard to focus on when you know the coaster's signature element is coming up next, and it's a great one. A zero-G roll over the park's entrance that goes through those two now iconic keyhole towers. To the rider, these are two great near-miss elements as it looks like your feet might hit into the towers, and to those watching the coaster below, it doesn't look like there's enough clearance for the trains to pass through. I've caught myself just standing around watching Gatekeeper go through those keyholes for more than 20 minutes at a time. Such a simple near-miss element, but extremely effective, and it's another reason to sit on the left side of the train, as you'll once again be lifted up into the air when entering the inversion. Gatekeeper doesn't spend too much time on the other side of the entrance, as the train goes right into an inclined dive loop and turns back toward the station. It's at this point that the train once again passes the keyhole towers, this time through an inline twist, but it narrowly misses them as it passes next to the towers. I would have liked if the train passed through the towers a second time, but maybe that would have caused structural issues, and as it stands, this is still a good near-miss element. Gatekeeper then heads into its mid-course brake run, but this isn't mid-course at all and is basically the end of the ride. When the train comes off the brakes, all that's left is a small helix and one airtime hill before the train goes into the brakes. The ending is my biggest complaint with Gatekeeper, as the train seems to lose all its energy when heading into the mid-course brake run, so that final helix and airtime hill just feel underwhelming. But this isn't a coaster designed primarily for enthusiasts. This is a coaster meant to appeal to the masses. Being situated right over the entrance, it makes sense that a lot of people entering the park would take an interest in riding Gatekeeper, so it has to make a good first impression to those that may not visit the park very often. Gatekeeper then finds itself in this weird middle ground, having to appeal not only to the general public, but to enthusiasts who may be intrigued by its high number of inversions. Gatekeeper is tied with Raptor for most inversions in the park, but that initial dive drop should not be overlooked, and I can't stress enough how fun those keyhole towers are to go through. Not everything is perfect with this coaster though, as it does have a pretty noticeable rattle, compounded by those vest restraints that accentuate every motion the train does. On most of my rides, the rattle was tolerable, and sometimes it's barely there, but there's always the small chance you might come off Gatekeeper with a slight headache. This has mostly to do with how the riders are distributed throughout the train, as changes in weight can result in a different ride experience, and because of that I suggest riding multiple times to determine which seat you enjoy best. I would definitely recommend sitting on an outside seat, as the inversions feel slightly more forceful that way. As it stands, Gatekeeper is a really fun wing coaster that I have marathoned in the past, which is pretty easy to do since this coaster has great capacity, and they almost always run either 3 or 4 trains on it. The rattle and lackluster ending do take away a bit from the experience, but it's still worth riding just for that first drop in the 0G keyholes. I'm going to give Gatekeeper an 8 out of 10. It's my favorite wing coaster I've ridden, and it has a lot of redeeming elements that keep me coming back to ride it again. That's going to do it from me for this review, but feel free to let me know your thoughts on Gatekeeper in the comments and how it compares to other wing coasters in the country. And I'll see you next time for more coaster content right here on Rampaging Rex Productions.